It started like any other routine traffic stop. Officer Daniels, a veteran cop with a reputation for being tough, pulled over a black woman driving a sleek black sedan. His expression was unreadable, but his stance was firm, intimidating. As he approached the driver's side, something about her calm, confident demeanor irritated him. Maybe it was the way she sat straight, unbothered. Maybe it was the way she met his eyes without fear. Either way, he didn't like it. "License and registration," he barked. The woman, dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer, reached for her bag without a word. She moved slowly, deliberately, too slowly for his liking. His patience wore thin. "I said now," Daniels snapped, his voice rising. Before she could finish pulling out her wallet, his hand shot forward, striking her across the face. The slap echoed in the still night air. A gasp caught in her throat, but she didn't flinch. She just stared at him, her eyes sharp, calculating. A moment passed, thick with tension. Then she spoke. "That's assault, Officer Daniels." Her voice was even, controlled, but there was something in it, a quiet authority that made his stomach drop. And then, with agonizing slowness, she pulled out her badge. Internal Affairs. Daniel's blood ran cold. His breath caught in his throat as reality crashed down on him. He had just put his hands on the one person who had the power to end his career in an instant. And judging by the look on her face, she wasn't about to let this slide. For a long second, neither of them moved. The red and blue lights from the patrol car flickered across her face, highlighting the sharp edge of her jaw where his hand had landed. Daniels felt a bead of sweat form at his temple. His fingers twitched near his holster, not out of fear, but pure instinct. He had screwed up, bad. The woman studied him, her expression unreadable. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. Daniel's mind raced. He had been on the force long enough to know that internal affairs officers weren't just cops. They were the ones who decided which officers stayed in uniform and which ones didn't. They were the ones who tore through reports, exposed bad behavior, and handed out consequences like it was nothing. His throat tightened. "Look, Save it." She cut him off, tucking her badge back into her blazer. "Step back." He did as she said, but his pulse pounded in his ears. The radio on his shoulder crackled, dispatch calling his number, but he ignored it. His eyes flicked to the body cam on his chest. Was it on? Was it recording? He couldn't remember. She reached into the car, retrieved her ID, and placed it in his hand. He glanced down. *** Serena Cole. Head of Internal Affairs ***. His stomach sank. Serena tilted her head slightly, watching his reaction. "You've been on the force, what, 10, 12 years? Long enough to know better." Daniel's jaw clenched. His mind screamed at him to fix this, to find a way out before everything crumbled. But looking into her eyes, he had a sinking feeling. It was already too late. Daniel's grip tightened around her ID, but his hands felt cold. His mind was scrambling for a way out, but every option led to the same conclusion. He had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Serena Cole wasn't just another driver. She wasn't someone he could intimidate, dismiss, or brush off. She had power, real power, and by the look on her face, she wasn't about to let this go. A car passed by slowly, its headlights cutting through the tension between them. Daniel shifted on his feet, trying to regain control of the situation. "Look," he started, keeping his voice low, "we can figure this out. No need to." Serena let out a small, humorless chuckle. "Figure this out," she repeated, her eyes narrowing. "You put your hands on me before I even had a chance to hand you my license. You think this is something we can just figure out?" Daniels clenched his jaw. He had dealt with internal affairs before, but never like this. Usually it was paperwork, interviews, reports, things that stay behind closed doors. But this was different. His name, his reputation, his career, it was all hanging by a thread. Before he could answer, the crackle of his radio interrupted. Unit 47, status check. Officer Daniels, do you copy? His pulse jumped. He knew dispatch had been waiting too long for a response. If he didn't answer soon, they'd send another unit. The last thing he needed was more eyes on this. Serena took a step closer. Go ahead. Answer it, she said, her voice smooth but firm. Tell them everything's fine. Daniels hesitated. He could hear the unspoken warning in her words. His hand hovered over the radio. Everything was far from fine, but for now he had no choice but to play along. Daniels exhaled sharply, pressing the button on his radio. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Unit 47, all clear. A pause. Then dispatch confirmed, and the radio fell silent again. But the quiet between him and Serena was anything but calm. She watched him, reading every twitch of his fingers, every shift in his stance. He knew that look. She was sizing him up, calculating. Daniels had been in tight spots before, but this was different. This wasn't some routine call gone sideways. This was a career-ending mistake staring him dead in the face. Serena finally spoke. Turn off your body cam. His stomach knotted. He hadn't even checked if it was recording. His fingers instinctively moved toward it, but then stopped. If it was on, shutting it off now would only make things worse. If it wasn't, it meant he had no proof of what had just happened, no evidence that could work in his favor. He met her gaze, trying to read her intentions. Why? She lifted an eyebrow, unimpressed. You don't want this footage in the wrong hands. Trust me. Daniels hesitated. This was a test, he could feel it. A siren wailed in the distance, making his pulse spike. He had minutes, maybe less, before another unit cruised by and saw what was happening. His mind raced through the possibilities. If he complied, did that mean she was giving him a way out? Or was she setting him up for something worse? Serena took another step forward, lowering her voice. You think I don't know how this works? You've been on this force long enough to know how things disappear when it's convenient. She tilted her head. So go ahead, Daniels. Make a choice. The air felt suffocating. His fingers twitched near the camera. One wrong move, and everything would spiral out of control. Daniels' fingers hovered over the body cam, but he didn't press the button. His heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at him to regain control, to find a way to turn this around. But Serena wasn't rattled. She wasn't flinching or backing down. She was waiting, watching, almost like she already knew what he was going to do. Then, out of nowhere, a second set of headlights washed over them. A patrol car. Daniels tensed. The vehicle slowed, rolling up behind his cruiser. The door opened, and out stepped Officer Reed, a younger cop with a sharp eye and a habit of asking too many questions. His gaze darted between Daniels and Serena, instantly picking up on the tension in the air. Everything all right here? Reed asked, his voice careful but alert. Daniels forced a tight nod. Yeah, just handling a traffic stop. Reed's eyes flicked to Serena, who hadn't moved an inch. Then, as if reading something deeper in the moment, he glanced at Daniels' body cam. A slow realization crossed his face. You got this on recording. Daniels' pulse jumped. It was the one question he didn't want to answer. If he said yes, he'd have to explain what happened. If he said no, Reed would wonder why. Before he could speak, Serena finally moved. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, tapping the screen. A second later, a voice rang out. Asterisk, asterisk, her voice asterisk, asterisk. Officer Daniels, do you copy? It was the exact moment from earlier, playing from her phone like an echo of reality. Daniels' stomach dropped. She had been recording, the whole time. Reed frowned. What is that? Serena locked eyes with Daniels, her expression cool and unreadable. Insurance, she said simply. Daniels felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. This was a trap, and he had walked right into it. Daniels' breath came slow and uneven. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, squeezing the air from his lungs. Serena stood firm, her phone still in her hand, the recording lingering in the air like a warning. Officer Reed's gaze darted between them, his face shifting from confusion to something colder, suspicion. Reed took a cautious step forward. "Daniels, what's going on here?" Daniels clenched his jaw. He needed to think, needed to control the damage before it spiraled out of his hands. But Serena wasn't giving him an inch. She slipped her phone back into her pocket. "I think we both know what's going on, Officer Reed." Her voice was smooth, steady. "But what happens next is up to your partner." Daniel's fingers curled into a fist at his side. He could feel his career slipping away with every second that passed. If that recording got out, Internal Affairs wouldn't just investigate him. They'd tear through his entire history, every report, every complaint, every moment he thought had been buried. His body cam was still on. The red light blinked, mocking him. But then, Serena did something he didn't expect. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You think I don't know how this system works?" She glanced toward Reed, then back at Daniels. "There's a way out of this, but you're not going to like it." Daniels' throat tightened. "And what's that?" She tilted her head, a knowing look in her eyes. "You're going to turn in your badge. Walk away. Quietly. No reports, no investigations." She let the words sink in before adding, "Or, this recording makes its way to the right people, and I make sure you don't get to walk away at all." Daniel's stomach turned. She was giving him a choice, but not really. Reed shifted uncomfortably. "Daniels." Daniels exhaled sharply, his mind racing. If he fought back, he'd lose. If he stayed, he'd be watched for the rest of his career, waiting for the day Internal Affairs found something worse. But if he walked away now, he'd be free. No pension, no title, but free. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then slowly, Daniels reached for his badge. His fingers lingered on the cold metal before he unpinned it from his uniform. He looked at Serena one last time, searching for any sign of hesitation. There was none. He placed the badge in her hand. Serena nodded, closing her fingers around it. "Smart choice." Daniels turned toward his cruiser, his face burning with shame. The job had been his life, and now, in a single moment, it was gone. As he reached for the door, Serena spoke again. "Oh, and Daniels." He paused, his pulse spiking. She smiled, just slightly. "You were right about one thing." He frowned. "What's that?" Her eyes locked onto his. "I knew exactly what you were going to do." His stomach dropped. And just like that, everything he thought he had controlled was never in his hands to begin with. Daniels sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on him, suffocating. His badge, his entire career, was gone. Just like that. He had spent years building a reputation, playing the game, bending the rules when it suited him. And now, in a matter of minutes, he had been outplayed by someone who had seen right through him. Through the rearview mirror, he saw Serena and Reed still standing by the patrol car. Reed looked uneasy, shifting on his feet, like he wasn't sure what to make of what had just gone down. Serena, though, she was calm. Unshaken. She had planned this from the moment she pulled out her badge, and he had fallen right into it. Daniels turned the key in the ignition, but he didn't drive off right away. His whole life had been about control, controlling situations, controlling people, making sure he always had the upper hand. And now, he had none of it. He glanced down at the empty space where his badge used to sit, the absence of it feeling heavier than the metal ever did. Finally, he pulled away from the curb, the flashing red and blue lights fading in his mirror. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew one thing: there was no coming back from this. Serena watched his taillights disappear before exhaling slowly. She had done what she came to do. Daniels would never wear a badge again, and that was justice in its own way. She turned to Reed, giving him a small nod before walking back to her car. Tonight, one chapter had closed, but the real work was far from over.